Elden Ring is a game that's designed entirely around payoff. Inspired by and spiritually succeeding its studio's former hits, including the critically acclaimed Dark Souls, Elden Ring's gameplay stays true to From Software's time-tested Souls formula of rewarding exploration with challenge, forcing players to adapt to fighting foes which will feel impossible at first, but through practice, patience, and careful play can be learned and eventually overcome. This recurring dynamic of facing some larger-than-life challenge, learning through failure, and eventually conquering that challenge is the bread and butter of what a Souls game is. But something that might not be immediately apparent is that this formula is not only present within the gamified parts of the experience, but also in its diegetic elements, its world building, its characters, and its lore. Understanding the world of a Souls game is just as much of a battle as mastering the actual tangible fights. Part of what makes these titles remarkable is how they present a story that can only really be told effectively through the medium of video games. Nowhere else would such a presentation style actually work, at least not to such great effect, much less actively being conducive to a gripping, emotional, and occasionally profound set of stories that I, for one, would consider to be on par with some of the greatest and most engaging fantasy works offered in other forms of more traditional media. But this comes at the cost of both complexity and obscurity. While the whole of the Souls games, and Elden Ring perhaps most of all, is chock full of great aha moments for players paying close attention to the storyline, the natural process of stringing the player along results in the endlessly fascinating, if not occasionally irksome, practice of supplying an answer to one mystery while producing 2 or 3 new ones, which has resulted in people asking no small number of derivative questions that may or may not seem like they're ever going to be satisfied. But with the recent release of Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, the player base knew that a lot of this game's residual mysteries would be revisited, at least in some capacity. But none probably would have guessed that the DLC would answer as many questions as it has, nor that the expansion's most heavy, sought-after, possibly world-altering lore would be revealed in the course of a single, entirely missable questline. Those who have played through the events which take place at the Cathedral of Manus Metyr will know that this is a very special part of the game. Not only do the characters and setting create an atmosphere alien to what we see anywhere else in the DLC, but in addition, I can't think of a single other quest which reveals the answers to as many mysteries, especially not as long-standing and pervasive ones as are addressed here. And for that reason, I thought it would be worthwhile to go over the full story of this quest with all of you, not only revisiting all of the vibrant areas and assembling the pieces of this great puzzle together, but also taking the time to really ruminate on some of the remarkable findings therein, as well as their deep-seated implications to the rest of Elden Ring's story. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why is it necessary to walk through this quest? Couldn't I just play through it on my own? And the answer to that is an emphatic yes. In fact, I would highly encourage it. My intention with this video is not to rob anyone of a first playthrough, nor to simply retell a story which has already been told simply for the sake of it. Instead, what I'm hoping to do here is to dissect the wealth of information presented to us over the course of this short journey, and to offer some context to a number of points, because ultimately, the information within this questline is pivotal to understanding the very genesis of the Lands Between and all of the events of the game. So for that reason, I think it's important for just about anyone who's even somewhat interested in the lore of Elden Ring to fully understand what's going on here. And in the process, we're finally going to shed some light on some of the most long-standing mysteries and closely held secrets that Elden Ring has to offer. Once again, if you haven't played this quest and have any inkling that you may want to in the future, I would recommend that you don't watch this video until you've gone ahead and run it through yourself. I would hate to rob you of experiencing this firsthand, but if you've already completed the story, you probably have at least some questions. So without further ado, let's get started uncovering the many secrets of Manus Metyr, the most revealing questline that Elden Ring has ever had. Shadow Altus is a vast area of the Land of Shadow. It encompasses many prominent points of interest that include a number of ruins, villages, forts, and catacombs, with its most prominent and narratively significant location likely being the Shadow Keep, the seat of Mesmer the Impaler, one of the most infamous and powerful figures in the entire DLC, who the Tarnished will need to face in order to challenge the great Mikola and his consort. But in spite of the vastness and variety of things to do in this area, one really need not explore the majority of Shadow Altus in order to complete the main objectives of Shadow of the Erdtree. Most of this place is full of purely optional content, and it also is a very disjointed location, with significant swaths of land separated vertically as well as laterally, so those who ride through it will become accustomed to seeing distant locales far below them out of reach. And one such location is right here. This spot is one of many across both the Lands Between and the Lands of Shadow, which feel like you ought to be able to get there just by jumping down in the right spot, but any attempts prove what, in the back of our minds, we already sort of knew. It's just a bit too high to get down there without dying. Still though, there should be a way to access this town, and as it turns out, the way to do so is through the ruins of Morth, a place which evidently used to be a hamlet or town of some kind, but over the course of hundreds of years, the ground seems to have given way beneath the buildings, pulling them down into the cavernous depths below. With some careful exploration, there's a path that we can take down into the subterranean areas here, but it's something that, if you're not paying attention, is easy to miss, causing you to end up hurling yourself off of embankments like me. As it turns out, these tunnels are one of the only ways to access the entire eastern side of Shadow Altus, but you might not think so based off of their grandeur, or lack thereof. All in all, these modest passages aren't much to look at, but they offer a sense of quietude, providing some physical separation between the story playing out behind us and the one that's about to unfold, which begins at the very place where these tunnels terminate, Bonny Village. Now, Bonny is a weird location. From the moment you arrive, it becomes clear that the locale is heavily linked with the age-old struggle between the Hornsent and the Shamans. This is a persistent theme throughout the DLC's campaign, as the subjugation of the Shamans is actually the process which led to the creation of the Living Jars. This is something that you may have first learned from the Belarut jail, but there's something particularly unsettling and cruel about what Bonny Village tells us about this age-old practice. Seeing the remnants of such gruesome work strung up against the backdrop of the Shadow Tree imbues the small town with a unique sense of horror. Until now, the jarring of the Shamans has taken place underground, or in areas cloistered away from prying eyes. But to see the whole village overtaken with it, while the remaining spirits of its population demonstrate such little remorse for their macabre work, definitely causes us to reconsider the true depths of the Hornsent's cruelty. Luckily though, we needn't stay here long. A bridge to the east of the town leads away from the accursed village, but before passing through, one might stop to marvel at the shed skin of a massive snake, shaded amongst a grove of small trees to the north, hidden even from the direct light of the moon. It's perhaps no coincidence that this skin shares the same texture as that of the great serpent which devoured the demigod Rykard atop Mount Gelmir, but what the skin is doing here of all places is unclear. Another strange finding to the north is a small bent tree, beneath which a beheaded corpse sits prostrate in an unfamiliar position, and by walking up to the corpse, we'll receive the ability to assimilate the gesture, which we learn to be called O Mother, a clear reference to Queen Marika. From here, we set forth over the bridges, on the far side of which lies the Whipping Hut, Bonny Village's most isolated building, inside of which can be found a cruel implement of torture and another spirit with more evidence of the atrocities committed here. Continuing on, we find ourselves upon a winding path, where the only way forward is haunted by great wolves along with a lone furnace golem, a massive war engine left behind from the crux of the Great Crusade, further invoking the horrors of a bygone age in this land's history. We evade both of these threats and eventually find ourselves at a site of grace, just beyond which lies a crossroad. To the right, we can see a massive stone tunnel carved into the side of a mountain, and to the left, the path winds in on itself, cutting through yet another grove of trees, shielding from view that which sits at the top of the cliff that we've just come around. From here, we veer left, abandoning the trodden path toward the southern road, where, cutting through the tree line, a building reveals itself. In front of us is a massive cathedral made entirely of stone, overgrown with vines and moss, in spite of its relative lack of structural disrepair. After seeing so many ruins and shattered dwellings on our journey so far, it's certainly a welcome sight, and heading inside this place, the Cathedral of Manus Metyr, a site of grace, patiently awaits our arrival amidst rubble and upturned furnishings. After taking a moment to rest, we notice a closed gate, which separates the entry hall from the back half of the structure, and upon trying it, we find that it can be opened with ease. Inside, rows of benches face forward to the far wall of the church, and here, among toppled candelabras and other variable debris, there's a man. At the center of the hall sits an ornate chair, atop which is seated a pale figure adorned in navy blue robes. The man says nothing as we approach, waiting patiently as if he's expected our presence for some time, which only adds to the almost alien sight of him in this desolate church, illuminated only by pale grayish light emanating from the candles at his feet. We figure this must be a man of some importance, so why not speak with him?
Well, we don't often receive visitors. I am Ymir. Welcome to Manus Metyr. It is a pleasure to have you. In lands so forsaken as these, chance encounters are precious indeed. Seeing that we have convened here on this day, allow me to mark the occasion with a modest offering.
He then hands us two key items, the hole-laden necklace and the ruins map, both of which shall prove their importance momentarily.
The map I gave you charts the site of a hallowed ruin. It is said that after sounding the hanging bell there, one's fate will be guided by the stars. I only wish to be of service, to help those who fight for their purpose. I'm not mistaken, am I? I can see it in your eyes. You are a fighter, are you not?
Ymir speaks cryptically, and though his instructions are clear, his intonation is less so. He must sense our confusion too, for should we speak with him again, he'll attempt to make his intentions a bit more clear and extend to us an offer of goodwill in the process.
Is something the matter? I've given you a map to the hallowed ruin? Oh, I suppose you expect a lesson of me, do you? I know the feeling. Those with purpose are nothing if not ravenous. For power. For truth.
From here, we can study a small number of glintstone sorceries. Some will be new to us, others not. But seeing this ought to put us more at ease. Ymir is a friend. He doesn't express any interest in seeking our head, as so many others in the lands seem to. He merely presents himself as a scholar of glintstone, and a follower of the night sky, which, as it turns out, is something that we can ask him about.
I, too, am a glintstone sorcerer. We study the stars and examine the life therein. Are you familiar with our findings? Long ago, we began as stardust, born of a great rupture far across the skies. We too are children of the greater will. Is that not divine? Is that not sublime? And yet, none can fathom its implications. Its utter brilliance.
If you've been paying close attention to the lore of Elden Ring up until this point, then you may have raised an eyebrow when first hearing these words spoken by the Count, most specifically this line, in which he mentions that we, referring to humanity or perhaps life as a whole, were born of, quote, a great rupture far across the skies. To some of you, this might sound vaguely familiar, and I would theorize that this is because what Ymir is referencing here is likely the primeval current. While we could deliberate on the exact nature of what the primeval current actually is for an entire video and then some, what we do know is that the magic which stems from it forms the basis atop which all glintstone sorcery was founded. Primeval sorcery is technically its own vein of spellcasting, as characterized by the spell's darker azure coloration and likewise, it has its own sect of scholars, philosophers, and visionaries. At least in the base game, though, the dichotomy between glintstone and primeval sorcerers, not only in their practices, but also in how they're viewed socially, is black and white. Primeval sorcery is by no means a popular form of study, which has caused its practitioners to attract the scrutiny of their peers, and it's resulted in the not altogether unfounded belief that many primeval sorcerers are simply madmen. To be clear, two of the foremost primeval sorcerers that we know of, Lusat and Azur, are shown to have replaced the vast majority of their bodies, including their heads and brains, with glintstone. So, we're definitely dealing with some pretty eccentric figures here, all things considered. But there's something else that Ymir states here that's also pretty important. He says that glintstone is the study of the stars, which is true. We've been shown that the two practices are synonymous for much of the game, but this begs the question as to what the primeval is the study of. And while the answer is much less cut and dry, primeval sorcery seems to be the study of the darkness, or the abyss which exists in space, the birthplace of the stars themselves, as has been theorized by many other content creators on occasion, and an interpretation which I want you to keep in mind as we move forward. But before we turn away, Ymir will leave us with some odd parting words.
Oh yes, do mind your feet around the church. You wouldn't want to hurt the little boy.
Okay, what does that mean? We look carefully around the church, searching for some explanation to the Count's warning, and as we do, we catch a glimpse of someone leaning against a pillar on the dextral side of the cathedral. Ymir's own standoffish bodyguard, with whom we can share a brief exchange.
I've no interest in small talk. My only concerns are the concerns of Count Ymir, and you are not among them. Only, there is one thing I will say. Count Ymir's kindness is a gift. Should you cross him, you will sorely regret it.
Something that really sticks out about this character is her armor. It's unlike anything that we're likely to have seen at this point. Jet black and adorned with etchings of gold in a pattern that resembles the robes of Ymir himself. It's also reminiscent of the fingerprint set worn by Vike, a character from the base game who's afflicted by madness from the frenzied flame. But clearly, frenzy is not present within the sacrosanct halls of Manus Metyr, not within Ymir nor Jolan, as we learn the knight's name to be when asking the Count about her, though we do learn that she has a troubled history.
Ah, you met Jolan. Well, I hope that she behaved at least. The poor girl has overcome grave misfortune. Her tongue can be sharp at the best of times, but don't think that makes her a bad person. It's no surprise her little sister, too, has a heart of gold.
Finally, if we proceed past Jolan into the courtyard, we find a small collection of weathered gravestones, but only one is still legible, and it reads, Yuri, beloved child, taken before his time. It would seem then that this is the boy whom Ymir bid us not to disturb before, but I don't know. His words made it seem like he was talking about somebody alive, somebody within the cathedral itself, not that we should mind disturbing some grave off to the side. It doesn't really seem to add up, but there's not a whole lot we can do about it for now. If we take a look at the map that was given to us earlier, we can match its image with an area to the east of the beautiful Cerulean coast, so that's where we're headed next. A breathtaking location speckled with lush blue flowers. It's always a pleasure to visit here, but to get to where we need to go, we have to work our way around to the beaches in the southeast before we can run up this ruin and bear witness to the great spectacle alluded to on the map, the Finger Ruins of Rhea. This is a vast open space, quite unlike anything we've ever seen in Elden Ring. Long, spindly, blackened fingers touched with gold jut out from the ground, as well as the nearby cliff face, making it abundantly clear what it is Jolan's armor is trying to assimilate. The monumental fingers form a series of concentric circles around a single structure at the center of the area. We have to fight past some monsters in order to get there, but upon reaching it, we can see that this must be the bell that Count Ymir told us of. As we approach, an option to interact with the structure will appear, and as we blow into it, a resonating sound washes over the desolate land. Once we're done, we also receive a talisman for our troubles, and its description insinuates that it hails from the time of the Erdtree's very creation, entrenching in our minds the idea that we're trespassing on a truly ancient and hallowed place. In spite of its alien beauty, it probably would be best if we don't hang around for long. So instead, we make our way back to Manus Metyr and report back to Ymir.
Oh, there you are. The exalted timbre of the bell has reached these ears of mine. Gracious, the starry sky is wondrous tonight indeed. Only your fate shines brighter. Now, these are for you.
Now we're given another map and something else, a talisman depicting a disembodied hand holding a glintstone.
Think nothing of it. I have made my decision to be of help. May the gleaming stars guide you evermore.
From here, if we check the Count's shop, there will be 2 new glintstone sorceries for purchase. These in particular shining a brilliant white as opposed to the typical bluish hue that we are familiar with from glintstone and primeval magic. But what's more, we also have a new dialogue option to partake in. And though it may not seem so at first, I want you to listen very closely to what the Count says here, because as we'll find out soon, not only does this text beautifully summarize what this entire quest is really about, but it may just be one of the most important pieces of dialogue, lore-wise, in this entire game. So here is what's said if we ask Ymir about the state of the world.
I fear that you have borne witness to the whole of it. The conceits, the hypocrisy of the world built upon the Erdtree. The follies of men. Their bitter suffering. Is there no hope for redemption? The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. They were each of them defective. Unhinged from the start. Marika herself. And the fingers that guided her. And this is what troubles me. No matter our efforts, if the roots are rotten, then we have little recourse.
Let's break this down a bit. In case it wasn't clear, essentially what the Count is saying here is that first and foremost, he understands that we have, in the course of our journey, bore witness to many of the great atrocities men can commit, and moreover, the atrocities of the very gods, including Queen Marika. This is true both within the DLC, but also the base game. The Great Crusade headed by Mesmer, the son of Marika, resulted in incalculable suffering. The divesting of Godfrey's grace caused a lot of pain as well, and of course, the shattering of the Elden Ring is very clearly something that had a lot of negative effects. These are all failures of those in the highest seat of power, bearing, at least from our perspective, very little thought for the other inhabitants of the lands between, and how the actions of the divine may affect them. So, in short, yes, Marika, a god, can cause suffering with equal facility to humans. In the second part of the monologue, though, Ymir does something interesting. He asks a hypothetical question. Is there, or is there not, any hope for redemption? It's an interesting question, and one we may have considered before, though I think that the natural conclusion until now has always been that there is at least some form of hope. Really though, consider our motivations throughout the entire story thus far. We want to repair the Elden Ring, and instantiate a new age, presumably to make the world a better place, whatever a better place might mean for us. In some interpretations, that may mean burning it all away and starting again, but that demonstrates a question of morality, whether or not such measures are necessary in order to set the world at peace, and it's a theme that's been explored to some extent in nearly every Souls game. But in all that time, the question of whether or not such measures would even be effective isn't really explored until now. What Ymir alleges is that the follies of men, as he puts it, the very shortcomings which led to suffering, hypocrisy, and the like, are so indelibly entrenched within not only the nature of humans, but the nature of the gods themselves, that no being, regardless of how powerful, is truly equipped to address those same problems. And in a way, it's not that hard to see where he's coming from. But by far the biggest allegation that Ymir proposes is that this flaw extends a step further than even Marika herself. For, as he makes quite clear, he believes that the 2 fingers are similarly inept, which is an assessment that's harder to evaluate. Though thought-provoking, we can't really put too much stock in this now, and ultimately all of this just boils down to Ymir's perspective and not much more, at least so far as we know. If we follow this dialogue chain, Ymir's also got a little something to say about Mikola, but it mostly amounts to him just doubling down on Queen Marika being the real source of the issues in the lands between, or at least we assume it's Marika that he's talking about at this point.
Ever young Mikola saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness. A tragedy if ever there was one. That he would feel compelled to renounce everything when the blame lay squarely with the mother.
Before moving on, we pay a quick visit to Jolan, who seems to regard us with a bit more compassion, or at least respect, given that Ymir has placed some level of faith in us.
How did Count Ymir reward you with that? Then I see you have gained his trust, and therefore mine. I am Jolan. The night is yours now to wield.
Something interesting that I discovered is that beyond this point, if you still haven't defeated Mesmer, like I hadn't, then upon entering his arena, there will now be a summon sign for Jolan placed to the left of the hall, and she'll readily help you take down the Impaler along with any other spirit that you may have already summoned. I maintain that the only reason I defeated him on New Game Plus 6, which is the level of the save that I use for pretty much all of my Elden Ring videos, is because of Yolan's assistance here, so that was a very welcome surprise. But either way, we don't actually need to interact with Mesmer at all in order to complete the rest of the present questline, though we will be headed toward the Shadow Keep where he resides, just from a different angle. The second ruins map alludes to a finger ruin located here, which can be accessed by running through that tunnel located at the crossroads that we talked about earlier. Going through here takes you to the backside of the Shadow Keep, and from here there's a lot of exploring that you have to do through the church district and the storehouse, but eventually, all of this will culminate in you reaching the back gate. You can proceed through the main exit, if you like, where you'll fight Commander Gaius, who, alongside the boar he rides on, were apparently quite close to the demigods, including Radon and Mesmer. And further up the path, you can find another point of interest in the form of the Shadow Tree Chalice, a large bowl overgrown with roots, or perhaps a crucible of sorts. But neither of these locations is actually an objective in the Manus Metyr questline. Instead, we'll need to step into a room off to the side of the back gatehouse, a room that contains very few things aside from a statue of Queen Marika, beneath which is a Shadow Tree fragment, and a message: "Have mercy for the spirited away shamans." It's a thought-provoking plaque. Once again, we're reminded of the atrocities against the shamans, but why here, of all places? We may find ourselves taking a moment to contemplate the message, to kneel at the foot of the statue, and to make use of that gesture that we picked up all the way back in Bonnie Village, Oh Mother. If we do, then we'll find that the statue slides to the side, revealing another chamber and a small path that leads out into a flowering grove. The unmatched serenity of the land before us is awe-inspiring, quite unlike anywhere else that we've ever been before, but as we traverse the area, making our way ever closer to those promised finger ruins on the map, we pass some familiar faces: tree sentinels. Although they rough us up a bit, we're able to press forward, past those odd skyward-pointing fingers, and past the finger creepers and leeches, until finally reaching the second bell. Just like before, we blow into it and receive another sacred talisman. Yet another job well done. But before returning to the Count, there's something else that seems to deserve a bit of investigation, and it all stems from those two enemies we passed on the way here. What are tree sentinels doing in the Land of Shadow? Sure, these guys are fairly prevalent within the base game. One of them can be found right away, as soon as we enter Limgrave. It's one of the first big challenges that the Tarnished will ever be pitted against. But these are the only two enemies of their kind within the entire DLC, at least to my knowledge. Which makes sense, considering the tree sentinels are the protectors of the Erdtree, not the Shadow Tree. Something in this pastoral setting is not as it seems, and if we head up the path which the first sentinel descends upon us from, we'll discover the biggest secret of this entire journey so far. This is Shaman Village. Upon arrival, two things should make themselves immediately apparent. First, the music which hangs in the air has changed. The echoing sound of the instruments and vocals of the Shadow Altus track have been replaced by the sparse notes of a harp. Notes that I would reckon most of you will probably recognize. But the other discovery is a golden sapling amidst a field of flowers, one which looks strikingly familiar, and beneath it is an incantation that dispels any doubts we may have had as to its origin. Its description reads, "Secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold, without order, creates a small illusory Erdtree that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal." This small, almost quaint little bluff is one of the only places in the game where we see buildings that are completely whole, as if the village was quietly abandoned rather than taken by force. There aren't even any additional materials or pieces of loot to be salvaged in the whole of the place, aside from one, found upon a statue within a hollowed-out tree on the southern side of the settlement, the Golden Braid. A braid of golden hair cut loose. Queen Marika's offering to the Grandmother boosts holy damage negation by the utmost. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There is no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. So it is that after more than 2 years of driving ourselves mad with guesswork and theory crafting, we finally have come to know the origins of Queen Marika herself. Because of what we know about the Empyrean system, that some mortals, likely some of those born to divine lineages, though certainly not all, are born as potential candidates for godhood, the most that could possibly be discerned of Marika's past pre-Shadow of the Erdtree is that she, well, must have been born an Empyrean. But now that we can access Shaman Village, the full story becomes a bit more clear. Long before the age of the Erdtree, before the Land of Shadow and the lands between were separated, whether in space or in time, Marika was a shaman, the very same peoples persecuted by the Hornsent. At some point, her village was likely raided, and the people who lived there, her friends, her neighbors, perhaps even one or both of her parents, would have been taken away and stuffed into living jars, just like the rest. Marika, however, as we now know, would rise against the tyranny of her oppressors, and to an unfounded level of success. The Great Crusade, which her son Mesmer upholds today, would have initially been her devising, and being an Empyrean, Marika would quickly attain power, the likes of which no shaman likely ever really had. It was only after entering the gates of Ymir and taking Godfrey as her first Elden Lord that Marika would visit the village again, the village of her birth, and leave behind the lock of her golden hair, and of course, this little Erdtree, a gesture, symbolic though it may be, of the end of her people's suffering. All of this can be pieced together from what we've learned so far, and seems almost entirely concrete in its validity. But unsurprisingly, there are also a number of implied theoretical avenues that we can explore as well, given what we now know. And one of these avenues seems like it might confirm something that many of us have speculated on way before the first ever DLC trailer was even dropped. That being that Marika may have been an Empyrean during the age of the Crucible. The age before the Erdtree was likely dictated by a god, with Placidusax as their lord. We'll come back to him later, trust me on that. And in this age would have existed an icon of divinity called the Crucible. I briefly hinted at this earlier, but I wholeheartedly believe that what we know in-game as the Shadow Tree Chalice is the physical Crucible. First, consider the definition of the word crucible. Most literally, it's a type of bowl or container in which metals or other substances can be melted, blended, or processed. But furthermore, take a closer look at any of the armor sets worn by the Crucible Knights, and it starts to become apparent that their symbol, the emblem which they all share and which has been right in front of our noses this whole time, really strikingly resembles a depiction of the Shadow Tree Chalice as viewed from above. Finally, keep in mind that Marika must have been an Empyrean, and accepting her, bear in mind that every other Empyrean that we know of in the game had at least one parent that was somehow connected to the god of the age, or her Elden Lord. So while the mystery of Marika's parents isn't entirely solved, far from it in fact, the village of her birth, along with the general context of the age at the time, seems to insinuate that someone connected to divinity likely had a child with a shaman, and thus Marika was born. The second big observation observation to make is that owing to the persecution she would have faced as a shaman at the hands of the Hornsent, a group of people who very obviously adorn themselves with aspects of the Crucible, there may be no wonder why the Golden Order has such a profuse hatred for Crucible magic in the current age. From Marika's perspective, this was the magic of her subjugators, and it was the icon of all the carnage she would have seen growing up. Therefore, is it really any wonder that she would have turned against it, or even tried to bury it when she ascended to divinity? All in all, there can be no question that the early years of Marika's life were marred with tragedy, and in a sense, it becomes easier to understand where she may have been coming from during a lot of the main events first told of in the base game. The last thing that stuck out to me as I was first uncovering all of this is the way that the minor Erdtree incantation presents itself as only the kindness of gold without order. And when you think about it, this is actually a really saddening line, because it reminds us of something that I think is often forgotten in Elden Ring lore, that being that the Golden Order was supposed to exist, at least originally, to help people, to give them hope, and to protect them from death, which I think is something that Marika truly feared, but not necessarily for selfish reasons, as many have alleged in the past. The reason that I assert this is simple, and I swear this is going to be the last bit of theory that I introduce for a while. First, bear in mind that before Marika's age, death almost certainly existed as a natural part of the order of the world. So what we see today as the Hornsent using people to make living jars may not have been much more than simply stuffing corpses into pots. It's hard to tell if this is entirely true. There's probably some enchantment going on here too that technically renders them living, but the fact remains that in any meaningful way, those subjected to the practice would be effectively dead. Upon gaining control of the Elden Ring for herself, we know that Marika entrusted the Rune of Death to her shadow, Malakath, bidding him to keep it hidden, so that the perils of death would never truly be known to anyone again. And I have little doubt that at least at the time, Marika probably saw what she was doing as altruistic, but as we know, the best laid plans go often askew, and thus the great perils of undeath took hold instead. Forestalling death could have just as easily been a well-meaning act with unforeseen consequences as a knowing and selfish one, and I would imagine that such an interpretation might also help to explain her actions during one of the most pivotal events in Elden Ring history, the Shattering. After the Night of the Black Knives, when the Rune of Death was used to kill none other than Marika's own son, Godwyn the Golden, and after she had deliberately cast it away to prevent such things nevertheless, well, it's hardly any wonder that such an event may have simply been too much for Marika to bear. The Shattering may have been nothing more than a hasty act of dejection. For, as we know, Marika wasn't beyond the follies of men spoken of by Ymir. Whether god or man, nobody can account for the great cruelties of life, and so perhaps it was that we've come to where we sit today. Now once again, that's all just the musings of one person, and much like the words of Ymir, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. I don't know for sure what's going on in this world more than anybody else, and after all, there's a big piece of this whole failure all the way down scenario that Ymir outlines which we've neglected to talk about, mostly because I deliberately avoided it earlier. Ymir's thesis, when we ask him about the state of the world, was that men are flawed, as is Marika, as are the fingers. But while at least two of those things may be true, that last point still seems almost hypocritical. After all, this guy adorns himself in robes with fingerprints on them. He sends us to ring the bells in finger ruins, and is a glintstone sorcerer. He, more than any, must possess a level of faith or understanding in the machinations of the stars. Surely, fingers, the foremost vassals of the greater will, must be able to avoid the shortcomings of people, and if we ever want to know the truth of the matter, then we have to return, once again, to Manus Metyr. Upon arrival, we proceed to the back of the church as usual, but this time something is different. As we walk through the big iron doors, we can see Ymir is holding something before he speaks.
Oh my, you poor thing. Another bad dream, Yuri. Put that rotten thing out of your mind. That tangled mess can't hurt you.
That seems incredibly weird, so we walk over to Jolan before approaching him further, but she seems to have really warmed up to us, which is just as off-putting in its own right.
I told you once, I've no interest in companionship, but I must admit, Count Ymir did seem very pleased. Perhaps an exception is in order. Ymir is a shining star, In our eyes, the only star upon the black canvas of the night. Our meeting with the Count taught us of the star-draped sky. We know that we cannot reach out to touch it, but we can peer up at its brilliance and heed its guidance. We will never again lose our way in the night. I have spoken far too freely. Pay me no mind. Let us focus on our shared purpose, our service to Count Ymir.
After this, we work up the courage to finally get close enough to the Count to make out what it is that he's holding, what Yuri actually is. He's a finger creeper, which Ymir now swaddles close, and upon speaking with him at last, a lot of pieces of this quest so far begin to tie themselves together.
Hello there. I heard another sound, colored by your essence. Simply exhilarating, I must say. The stars are dark tonight, but rest assured, this is no ill omen. On the contrary, I believe that this portends a magnificent starry cascade. Now, take this, my final gift to you. May you join the glimmering stars above. Oh yes, I believe I can feel it brewing. This evening is a sign of a greater night to come.
When visiting the shop, we can purchase one last spell, the Fleeting Microcosm, which is extremely interesting for reasons we'll get into shortly, but what's more is that before we go, we're given one last chance to probe Ymir's mind and get to the heart of what we're all wondering at this point. At last, the Count will discuss the fingers.
Do you recall what I said? That Marika and the fingers that guided her were unsound from the start? Well, the truth lies deeper still. It is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. The fingers are but unripe children, victims in their own right. We all need a mother, do we not? A new mother. A true mother who will not give birth to further malady.
Ymir has said from the beginning that, to his estimation, the fingers are as perturbed as mortal men, but it's only now that he begins to illuminate why, and of particular blame is their mother, who has apparently gone mad. And if you think about it, the Count may have actually been hinting at this all the way back when we talked to him about Mikola after ringing the first bell, but it's one of those pieces of dialogue that only really makes sense in retrospect. And so finally we get an idea of exactly what Ymir is trying to do from Manus Metyr in the first place. In truth, he seeks to become the Mother of Fingers, as he puts it, a mother who will not create further malady, which I think tells us a lot about Ymir as a character, because there's a very obvious problem with this implied plan. Ymir is human, and therefore he's not immune to folly. So far, everything he's said about the state of the world has, in a way, turned out to be true, and so it seems odd that a man as outwardly introspective as he would fail to see this very simple issue. Ymir becoming a part of the solution to the world's problems completely flies in the face of the sort of absurdist stance he's thus far adopted, and to make matters worse, that's hypocritical, plain and simple, which is one of the core components of folly that he's attributed blame to. I don't want to belabor this point too much, but it can't really be overstated just how deeply the Count is in violation of his own ideals with this one. It's actually baffling, and it's also brilliant writing, because in spite of the fact that he's now proven himself to be a total quack, a character that's at best inconsistent and at worst idiotic, one can't deny that Ymir nevertheless still possesses immense knowledge of this world, dating all the way back to its very founding. So regardless of how weird or dangerous he may prove to be, we still want to follow through with his demands, because doing so has consistently led us to extreme discoveries, not unlike those just made with regard to Queen Marika. If for no other reason than to quell our own curiosity, we have to continue to the third and final finger ruin. We're in the thick of some truly cosmic happenings now, and closer than ever to the truth behind what exactly goes on in the night sky over the lands between. So let's bid Ymir goodbye for the final time and see where all of this goes.
May you join the glimmering stars above.
When looking to the map, it becomes clear that the third and final finger ruin is located much closer than the previous two, directly under the cathedral in fact, and interacting with Ymir's now vacant seat, we can gain access to the deepest secrets thus far. The finger ruins of Ymir are certainly the smallest of the ruins that we encounter, and also the most straightforward, devoid completely of finger creepers, leeches, really enemies of any kind, with the exception of Swordhand of Night Anna. This is an invader who will attempt to fight you as you make your way toward the Finger Bell, and while she's fairly easily defeated, there's something that just doesn't seem right about her being here. In fact, we're reminded of something Ymir spoke of a little while ago.
It's no surprise her little sister, too, has a heart of gold.
Messing with Anna seems like an absolute affront to the companionship we've only just begun to foster with Jolan, but our unease is only furthered by an item that we find nearby, the Finger Weaver's Cookbook, written by a student of the Finger Ruins. His brush with the sublime all but shattered his mind, though he was left capable enough to leave these few precious words. Well, that ought to put us at ease. And upon interacting with the third and final Finger Bell, we learn exactly what that divinity is, and what it is that Ymir has been teasing at from the very beginning. Metyr is a beast quite unlike any that we've ever seen, a visage of cosmic horror on par with something like the Astels, but wholly different in appearance and the real source of the dread that stems from their presence. While the Astels are scary because, well, look at them, Metyr is ominous for a different reason. It's more of the unknown, the idea that just based off of her appearance and her epithet, we know that we're dealing with something truly ancient. This is the mother of all fingers, including the two fingers and the finger creepers we've witnessed in or around the other ruins. In fact, we can see that even now, new children are in the process of emerging from her body, both near the helix-shaped tail fingers and from the mother's stomach, forming a grotesque mass of half-birthed kin. It's harrowing to be in her presence, and she absolutely possesses the power one would expect of such a being. The first phase of the fight is difficult because in spite of Metyr's vast size, she's able to quickly body the Tarnished, and hurls projectiles, making it a difficult task to counter her at both close and long range. Even with the companionship of a summoned spirit, the Mother of Fingers excels at dividing her attention between foes, and with such a large form, she has no problem flicking you away as you try to take advantage of any opportunistic attacks. But the real power and alien grace of the creature is on full display within her second phase, where she reveals a microcosm not unlike that in the enchantment we previously purchased from Ymir. At this stage in the battle, we're in the true thick of the anomaly, and this isn't helped by the fact that the cosmic Lovecraftian music of the first phase has faded away, replaced by a low, droning hum. At long last, though, the bloody work is done, and the Mother of Fingers falls to our blades. A sense of quiet falls across the arena as the gravity of what we've just done begins to sink in, something which the remembrance of the Fingers makes all too clear for us. Quote, "Remembrance of Metyr, the Mother of Fingers, hewn into the Shadow Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. The mother of all two fingers and finger creepers was in turn a magnificently gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, and the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between." That's right, Metyr was here even before the Elden Beast, and now we've killed her. If hell existed in Elden Ring, we'd definitely be going there. After resting for a moment in the arena, we make our way back for the fourth and final time to the cathedral, and unlike before, nobody occupies the Grand Hall, not even Jolan, but instead, the only thing that seems to have changed at all is that the Count's seat once again plugs the hole to the finger ruins below. Maybe that's where everyone is?
What have you done? You've wounded Count Ymir most irreparably, such that he wishes for your death, and I must attend to the Count's concerns.
Although not a particular surprise, facing Jolan as enemies is certainly a task that we're by no means proud to undertake. Surprisingly though, the reason for which she fights is not as we probably would have expected. She makes no mention of her sister's slaying, only that we've displeased Ymir. It's almost as if she's unaware of exactly what transpired in the sanctum below. But defeating her is only the beginning.
My dear star, a fine mother, you will be.
My shining star, grant me a mother's strength. Look here, at my fingers. I will be the true mother. And I will be the only mother.
Next, Ymir himself appears in front of his throne, this time with his robes thrown open to reveal beneath a bed of fingers, as his epithet reveals his de facto ascension to the title of Mother in Metyr's absence. His plan, however naive, is complete, but we can't let someone as ideologically troubled as he undertake such an important cosmic role. Better the seat be left vacant entirely than filled by a hypocrite.
Truly, I desired to be your mother.
Upon his defeat, Ymir leaves us with some final words before dropping a number of items, including his bell-bearing, an item called the maternal staff, and his clothing, with the most interesting of these being the High Priest hat, which reveals a past correlation between Ymir and R'hllana, before the Count apparently abandoned his allegiance to the moon, in the process, no doubt, discovering the stars and the secrets of the fingers. In a way, this makes Ymir one of the greatest scholars of glintstone we've had the misfortune of coming across, but in the end, he was just as disturbed and reckless as the rest. There are a few more things that need to be done to wrap up this quest in its entirety though. If we reload the area, we'll find Jolan, this time very much depressed by her usual post. She sits upon the ground, and her words make it clear that with Ymir gone, she's lost all purpose in this world.
Count Ymir, the stars, the sky. I see them not.
From here, we have a choice. The first option is to simply abandon her, leaving her fate very much undecided. But the others each require a consumable item, the Iris of Grace or the Iris of Occlusion, respectively. Giving her the second of these irises grants you her sword and ends the quest. But the Iris of Grace seems to heal the knight's broken resolve, if only a little.
Oh, it blinds, as if our night simply never was.
Jolan will now become a summoned spirit, who we can fight alongside in any boss fight of our choosing, but there's still the matter of her sister. Across from the cathedral entrance is a location called Rabath's Rise, and although we can't go to the top of the structure by the conventional means, we are able to reach it by doing some clever jumping from the cliff face to the south of Shaman village. If we do, we can actually find Anna's puppet body atop the tower, showing that Ymir, in all of his cruelty, used the very spirit of his loyal knight's own sister for personal gain. If we interact with the puppet while possessing the ashes of Jolan though, we can usher Anna's spirit into the ashes as well, reuniting the two at last, and ending their stories, hopefully with some measure of peace. From here, there's only one loose end left, and that's Yuri, the little boy whom Ymir's entire plot seemed to be in service of. And while we never see the finger creeper he was holding again, nor do we get any further explanation about the character, paying one last visit to the gravesite near the cathedral will award us with one final incantation, Cherishing Fingers. Quote, "A finger sorcery of Count Ymir, aspiring mother of fingers, surrounds the caster with a mesh of hefty fingers that wards all manner of projectiles, whether magical or physical in nature, away from the caster. Charging enhances potency. The dear fingers look after their mother, or perhaps that is merely what the mother wishes to believe." So, there we have it. The most profound questline in Elden Ring is concluded, but near the end there, a lot of things happened really fast, and we weren't left with a whole lot of time to necessarily assimilate a lot of the stuff going on. In typical Elden Ring fashion, we knew that what we were taking part in was big, but getting a handle on what that means is another thing entirely. What's more, we never actually came to any sort of conclusion regarding Ymir's whole guiding philosophy. Thus far, we haven't been presented with anything beyond his own words to suggest suggest that Metyr is flawed, that she's unfit to carry out the divine bidding of the greater will, which is kind of the crux of justifying all of his actions. The only thing we know is from the Remembrance, which tells us, once again, that Metyr is an ancient being, one that wholly predates the Elden Beast, which itself is a rather large revelation. But to gain any further insight on this last point, we have to visit Enya at the Round Table Hold and trade the Remembrance in for another item, the Staff of the Great Beyond, which will lead us to today's last revelation and hopefully solidify for you the reason that I think this questline is so incredibly important. Quote, "Staff fashioned from the tail fingers of Metyr, the mother of fingers, and the microcosm raised aloft over the crux they form. Catalyst for casting both sorceries and incantations. The mother received signs from the greater will, from the beyond of the microcosm. Despite being broken and abandoned, she kept waiting for another message to come." If you have any investment in the story of the game, and I imagine that if you've watched this far into the video, then you probably do, the description of this staff should shake you to your very core. On the one hand, Metyr was broken. We don't exactly know how, but the description makes it very clear, though I believe that the more important part of this dialogue comes from that second condition. She was also abandoned. The fingers did fail, and resultingly so did Marika, and so has humanity. But the reason for that failure, perhaps not entirely, but at least in part, has been influenced by the greatest failure of all. Something so utterly incomprehensible that even Ymir didn't directly face the possibility himself, and that is that the greater will itself has dropped the ball too. Any information that may have been passed down from the fingers to the gods and their Elden Lords has been a lie. At best, the enlightenment that Metyr received and passed along to the fingers, who then passed it along to the finger readers and so on, is drastically outdated. So much so that the greater will may not have even been in contact with the physical world of the lands between for ages upon ages at this point. And what's worse is that it seems like somewhere along the line, some entities, even if not very many, began to take notice of this. Remember how earlier I talked about Placidusax, the three-headed lord of the ancient dragons who sits in his storm beyond time at Faramazula? Well, his remembrance has been an important part of developing our whole view of Elden Ring's world pre-Golden Order for 2.5 years now. And it says, in part, that, quote, "Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return." And there's been a back and forth forever about whether that means a god on the level of somebody like Queen Marika, or an outer god, which seems more likely based on his position, assimilating the look of the two fingers as they reach skyward in search of divine information. It's the same stance that we see the two fingers in the Round Table Hold take midway through Elden Ring's story, to which Enya says that it'll be a long time before they're responsive again. Now, both of these interactions seem to make a bit more sense, but the truth is infinitely darker than I think a lot of people were expecting. The greater will has abandoned us all. The reason that the two fingers, as well as Placidusax, are still left to wait may be because the greater will itself has fled. It's hard to be sure why, or how something like that could even be possible in the first place, but nevertheless, I'm forced to believe that it's true. And in turn, it seems that what Ymir says about nobody being qualified to fix the problems they've made for themselves rings more true than even he could have imagined. Humanity is a mess. The gods are a mess, and the outer gods are a mess as well. What is someone to do in that situation? It's exactly as Ymir put it, actually. The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. And that is why this is Elden Ring's most profound questline. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this whole thing is that I think it's the closest we've ever been to being able to fully summarize the world of Elden Ring on a macro scale. I've long wanted to create a sort of timeline video, minutely outlining each and every happening in the lands between, but this story and this world quickly spiral into something so vast that it's very, very hard to do something like that well, if at all. And maybe this comes across as a little bit disappointing to some people, but having gone through this quest, having made peace with some of the major mysteries that have been plaguing my mind and the minds of many others since this game came out in 2022, I'm not sure that I feel like a video like that is really even all that necessary anymore. I know that might sound kind of weird to say, but when you spend so much time obsessing over the nuances and details of a story like this, it's easy to get sort of driven mad by all of the mystery. Given what we've talked about today though, even if what I theorized about is wrong, or there's other ways it can be interpreted, I'm glad to at least have some kind of answer that feels satisfying, and which, as a community, we can build off of, so that maybe we can piece together the rest of what this astounding game has to offer together. With that though, this is Averberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.